Well, it doesn't seem, can you hear me? Yeah. It doesn't seem like 4.5 months, but here we are. I have some very quick announcements. You can watch the Democratic debate with us if you want next Thursday, September 12th at Wallace Annenberg Hall with the Annenberg Center for Communications Leadership and Policy as our co-sponsor. We're serving pizza at 4 p.m. We'll have a discussion at 4:30 with Christina Bellantoni, with two of our fall fellows, and Klenk and Ron Christie, who we hear from tonight, and with Bill Carrick, Democratic strategist and chief advisor for Dianne Feinstein and Eric Garcetti. The debate's from 5 to 8. If there's any interest after that marathon, we'll do another half hour of analysis afterwards. Second, our fall conference, the Disunited States, Tribalism in American Politics, will bring together journalists, academics, and politicos to discuss how polarization is driving us all into our own corners. Friday, September 27th, from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. at Town and Gown. You can RSVP on our website. So welcome back to our series of political conversations, co-sponsored with the Department of Political Science and International Relations. In fact, we will be back here at Ground Zero on Tuesday, September 17th, to discuss how media covers campaigns with Ron Brownstein, chief editor at The Atlantic, and TV broadcast producers Colleen King and Tammy Haddad. Starts again at 5 p.m. and free food at 4:30. You can join our fellows for Monday roundtables from 12 to 1 at the lab, and on Wednesday for Politics and Prose at the, I have no idea how to say this, the Turve Cafe patio. Somebody can correct me, please. Finally, we're going to have a visiting fellow, Patrick Griffin, an expert on New Hampshire, who will be teaching a course in October on the early state primaries. Please see Sydney Lopes in the back if you're interested. Tonight's event is being broadcast on Facebook Live, and I'm delighted to have this conversation with, first, Ron Christie, founder and CEO of Christie Strategist, a political analyst for the BBC and a commentator on other networks, former special assistant to President George W. Bush, and deputy assistant to Vice President Cheney for domestic policy. He's written 3 books, and they're really interesting books, actually, on the intersection of race and politics. Ann Klenk is the former senior producer and co-executive producer of Hardball with Chris Matthews. She's also worked alongside and produced journalists like Tim Russert, Chuck Todd, Joy Ann Reid, and Steve Kornacki. She was the only woman executive producer in prime time and the only primetime executive producer located in Washington. Adam Nagourney has been the Los Angeles bureau chief of the New York Times since 2010. Previously, he was chief national political correspondent from 2002, covering the 2004 and 2008 presidential elections. And he's almost finished with a new book on the history of the New York Times, a sequel to The Kingdom and the Power, which will cover the last 50 years at the Gray Old Lady. So I'm going to begin with the first question. I think I'll start with Adam. We'll work our way down. Why do you think Biden's been holding steady in the Democratic field despite the press coverage about his gaffes? For example, asking the other day, what if Barack Obama had been assassinated in 2008? Now, in fairness, I should note that he was trying to explain what it felt like when he was young and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were killed. But this became a big story in the press, and there have been lots of others. But so far, this and the other alleged gaffes seem to have had little or no impact. Why?
That's a good question. First of all, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. I'm sure you would have come without the free food, just to see us. So, a couple of things going on with Biden. First of all, I think that the damage of gaffes has been lessened because of Donald Trump. I think that people are kind of willing to look the other way on some of these. Most of them have been kind of minor. I would argue, we could argue about that more. But third of all, I think that Democratic voters are looking first and foremost for somebody who they think can beat Trump. That's the dynamic right now. That could change, but that is my sense of where things are right now. And people look at the field and they think that Joe Biden represents a return to normalcy. There's something very comfortable about him. I don't want to use any cliches, but he might be a little bit flawed, like, your grandfather at it's Thanksgiving dinner or something, but there's something about him that's very solid. So I think that people are willing to overlook a lot or forgive a lot. I think the question Bob raises is a really critical question, which is there a point where that stops? Is there a point where people look at him and go, he's a flawed candidate, and now we're not sure he can hold his own against Trump. I've seen no evidence of that so far. He seems to have a lot of running room. I wouldn't use the word Teflon, but I think a lot of the thing about Trump about Biden, sorry about that, is baked into the cake. And the last point I would make is, this is Biden, right? I mean, I remember covering him briefly when he ran for president, and I think it was 1988. And was there another year? He's running
1988.
And he just does this stuff. I mean, a very quick story. When he announced in 2004, 2008, whatever,
2008.
On his very first day, he talked about how Barack Obama was a very articulate candidate, and he had to kind of apologize for that really quickly. And a colleague of mine suggested that the lead of my story should be that Joe Biden's campaign started and ended today. That colleague was Maureen Dowd. That would have been better for a column. And a smarter editor said to me, "No, you don't want to do that," and I did. So,
Ann?
Well, I love Joe Biden. I have to tell you, I've covered him for 30 years. He's exactly who you think he is. He's authentic. He's familiar. He messes up. He apologizes for it. He looks like someone you know. And after dealing with the chaos of the Trump administration and the intentional lying at times, I think that he's soothing. I think he feels like people are going to say, okay, this country has been through we've been through enough. We don't want any change. We don't want to take any chances. We don't want to go too left or too right. He might be just right. And not only that, Trump has really dismantled or tried to dismantle the Obama legacy. And I think this is a very strong point for Joe Biden. He was Obama's vice president for 8 years. You all know that. And he's going to say, maybe, I don't know what he's going to say, but he's probably going to give comfort to people saying, I'm bringing back that legacy. I'm bringing back this calmness, this normalcy. And I'm a professional politician. I am not like a businessman. I'm not coming out of left field. You know who I am. And I'm not going to hurt you or scare you.
I'm not even sure he has to say it. I think people will automatically infer that he will restore the Obama legacy and build on it. Ron?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob, for the invitation to not only speak here tonight, but to be with all of you all this semester. I think it's going to be a remarkable opportunity for all of us to engage and to have a very important political conversation at a time that when you're looking at a Joe Biden and saying, why is he still here? Why is he still viable? I think that after 8 years of the Obama administration, there was a sense in the country that people wanted disruption. Disruption in the form of Bernie Sanders or disruption in the form of, obviously, Donald Trump. And here we are nearly 3 years into the Trump administration, and I think that Trump has so upended, disruption I think is the term I would use, conventional political wisdom, that people are now saying, well, wait a second, as my colleagues here have said, maybe we want a return to civility. Maybe we want a return to normalcy in our politics and the way that we treat political opponents, as well as charting a vision for the country. So in my view, I think that Joe Biden represents the old school. I mean, Ann's covered him for 30 years. I've known him for probably 20 some odd years. And she's exactly right. He's exactly what you see is what you get. He's Uncle Joe. He's the guy who's going to sit there and pat you on your knee and tell you an old story about the mother country and otherwise make you feel much better about yourself. And so that, Bob, is why I think he's sticking around.
Okay, we got to spend a minute on the Republicans before I go back to the Democrats.
Only a minute.
So I'm going to start with you. Polls what's the prospect of a serious primary challenge to Donald Trump?
Negligible. I mean, I think if you look at the way our political apparatus is set up, in a two-party system that we have here, it is so difficult to break through, to raise money, to get out there and to get on the ballot, that to take an incumbent president on, whether you like him or not, Donald Trump would be very difficult, Bob, to disrupt and to get him off the ballot to face a serious challenge.
Either of you disagree with that?
I agree completely. I mean, I can't see any. I see these stories about people talking about challenging him. Bill Weld. I don't even pay. Honestly, I don't pay that much attention to them. It'll happen. It'll get some attention from the media. But I mean, look at the Republican Party now. The Republican Party is Donald Trump top to bottom. So I just cannot imagine. And the primary is sort of the boiled down Republican Party. It's the most activist Republican Party. So I honestly can't see any way famous last words to say something so sweeping. But I can't see any way that there's a serious challenge to Donald Trump.
You know, and I agree, and I want to point out when I said that I really like Joe Biden, I really love politicians. I like politicians. I loved covering politicians. I thought the world of John McCain. Yeah. So there are tremendous Republicans out there and Republican operatives, so this country doesn't need to be so divided. All the politicians are not bad and corrupt, and it's really not a cesspool in Washington. It's a great
Well, it
place.
might be a sewer now.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, it's the swamp.
A swamp. Yeah.
Look, the general election seems to be reversed from what you're saying about the primaries. Poll after poll is showing that almost every Democrat can beat Trump, and sometimes by a pretty big margin a year from November. Do you think that's probably true, or are we way too early to tell?
I mean, I think we've all learned a lesson from 2016. From the beginning, I've argued that Trump's election in 2016 was a bit of a wild card election. He won. He won by winning 3 states by 90,000 votes.
No, say you've changed 38,000 votes in 3 states, and Hillary Clinton has an easy electoral college majority.
And he's running against probably the one person in America he could probably beat. And emails. I mean, you've heard it all before. I don't want to waste your time, but so I think that he is the underdog in the race. But I think it'd be crazy to say that he's likely to lose. To overstate that. We haven't seen the contrast yet between him versus the other candidates. All the Democrats are flawed as well. So, but again, the amount of energy, the amount of anti-Trump energy out there, the extent to which I think a lot of people didn't vote who would have voted for Clinton in 2016 because media organizations like ours told them that she was likely to win. And I think a lot of those people are going to turn out and vote. We saw that. I don't know how many of you are from Southern California, but we saw that in this part of the state in 2018 during the midterm elections. The energy is really, really high. So, I think that Trump is in a very problematic position, but I think any Democrat who thinks this election is over is nuts, frankly.
I agree.
Anyone disagree with that?
Negative.
Okay.
Negative.
So I'm going to come back to the Democratic primary race and ask, and we could start with you, Ron, how do you assess the media narrative that the primaries are really a showdown between the center left and the left in the Democratic Party? Is that what's really driving this contest?
No, I think it's a drive to the far left. I mean, if you look at some of the positions that a number of the candidates who are perceived to be in the majority are articulating right now, I don't think Democrats 4 years, 8 years ago, a Barack Obama today, I don't think could get reelected given the way that they are with the hard left. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about a whole variety of issues. But for me, the question is electability, and I agree wholeheartedly with Adam's point of I would never rule Trump out. But if you get someone who is so far to the left, this election, as all of us up here have looked at for over the years, it's about how do you appeal to the independents? How do you get folks who might be sitting on the fence? I'm not sure if I'm a Republican, I'm not sure I'm a Democrat, but I want to vote for candidate X. The electability factor is going to be really critical. So I don't think it's a question of center left or far left. It's a question of who can the Democrats nominate who can beat Trump.
I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is a Democratic stronghold forever. It was a union town. Voted for Obama, always voted for Democrats, and it flipped for Donald Trump in the presidential election. And I fear that if the Democrats come up with the far left candidate, they'll vote for Trump again. This Democratic city, because they have nothing. They have nothing. They don't have jobs. They have a chip on their shoulder. They're angry. And if it's too far left, they'll dismiss that and they'll stay with him. And I think there are many, many communities around this country that we're not aware of, and he certainly has the Republicans solidly behind him. So I think the Democrats would be making a big mistake by going too far to the left.
And one really obvious good example of it is, Trump is a very good politician, is very good at using issues to make points and to delegitimize other candidates. So the whole thing about Medicare for all, or whatever you want to call it, the way a smart Republican or opponent is going to frame that is he's going to take your insurance away from you and make you get government insurance. That is a killer issue in a general election. It just is. So, when you ask me if I'm if I'm 100% sure Trump's going to lose, one of the reasons I don't I'm not 100% sure is because we do have Democratic candidates, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, not Joe Biden, who Kamala Harris, I think, she was a little bit mushy on that, who are embracing that position. I think that's a really problematic general election position. The history of politics, as Bob will tell you, is that candidates try in a primary like this to appeal to primary voters and then figure out a way to move back to the center. I don't think Bernie Sanders has room to do that. I think Elizabeth Warren still does, but it's getting hard, and I'm telling you that that's a real killer issue. So is saying that illegal immigration should not be against the law anymore. I think that's also a really killer issue. I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not arguing the merits of this. I'm not arguing the policy of it. I'm arguing flat politics. That's all.
I'm going to do a follow-up that ties this discussion together that we've just had with something that Ron said. There are people inside the Democratic Party who say that what the Democrats need is an exciting progressive candidate, you would say far left, to galvanize the base. Others say they want a candidate who won't scare off more moderate swing voters, someone they're convinced can beat Trump. That certainly, by the way, was a clear majority feeling among Democrats in our USC Dornsife LA Times poll. What is electability anyway? And is it possible to balance the goals of galvanizing the base and making sure that you put yourself in a position where you can get those independent voters? Ann, you want to start?
Well, you know, your vote for president is the only vote that every American makes.
That's right.
That's the only vote that every single American makes is the vote for president. So you can't just go with the base. You have to broaden the base. And I agree with everything that you both have said, and you, Bob, that if you go too far to the left, if on immigration and health care and other things too, that Donald Trump will once again, win the presidency. So
let me put in a word though for the Sanders Warren, and I don't think they're exactly the same, but for the Sanders Warren advocates, and that is that if you look at 2016, tremendous fall off in African American votes, fall off in Latinx votes, and very poor turnout of young people. And so they're saying you got to make sure that those folks are energized and they turn out. Now, they did turn out in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is just my gut. I think that they are. This is an unusual election because normally you have to deal with that conflict you're talking about. But in this election, Donald Trump is energizing those voters. I think we saw that in 2018. It didn't happen in 2016 because a lot of people thought he wasn't going to win for the reasons I just mentioned before. And I think people now realize, for better and for worse, Trump supporters for better, Trump opponents for worse, what it means to have Trump as president and what it will mean for another 4 years. And I think that voters, those groups of voters that you're talking about on the left, African Americans, Latinos, particularly younger voters, I think they're going to realize much more now the stakes of this election, so they won't have to be as much of an effort to, quote-unquote, fire up the base as you would have in a normal election.
I think you could put Elizabeth Warren on the VP. I think you could see Biden with Elizabeth Warren because I think it could be, it could be more of a balancing type of thing. You can vote for the uncle and you can vote for this very, very smart woman, and I think there are a lot of young people, I know there are a lot of women that would like to see a woman.
But I think she'd have to say that she was supporting his
Him.
policies.
Yes.
Much as George H.W. Bush had to recant his support for reproductive rights to get on the Republican ticket with Ronald Reagan in 1980.
Tax cut, right, Bob? Wasn't that the other
And
issue?
the tax cut, he had to, which he had called voodoo economics.
Voodoo economics,
He
yeah.
had to suddenly say it was the best idea around.
Absolutely right.
But now let's talk about Warren and Sanders for a minute because we have these debates coming up. A lot of people believe that Warren's steady rise has seen her taking support away from Bernie Sanders and creating a ceiling on what he can do in these primaries and caucuses. So he's going into the debate. He's thinking about that. They've had this non-aggression pact where neither of them attacks the other. What would you tell him to do? What can he do?
I think a lot of folks who felt the burn before aren't feeling it in this cycle. I think there was a certain authenticity, a certain freshness, a certain enthusiasm that young people, disenfranchised voters felt about Bernie Sanders the last time. This time, I think they're looking at him and saying, well, we're hearing the same thing. he really hasn't put forth many new ideas. And you can say what you like about Elizabeth Warren if you're a conservative, but the woman is extraordinarily smart, and she has a lot of policy positions that people, if they feel so inclined, can delve into. And so if I'm Bernie Sanders right now, I'm thinking she's got the big mo in politics, which is momentum. I mean, she's getting thousands and thousands of people going out to her events. And Bernie, while still very popular in the progressive movement, I just think, Bob, he's yesterday's news.
I also think he's angry. I don't know if you guys caught him with the baby. He was at a big event, and the baby starts crying. He goes, get that baby, shut up, I mean, it's like he's yelling at the mother to keep the baby, from crying. So I think there's this...
That's probably one vote lost.
Yeah.
And one vote gained. That's pretty cool.
Right. So I think he's got this edgy thing, and he's kind of angry all the time. And I think, like I said, I think this country has been riled up, really riled up and wound up, and they're looking for someone who's, just more chill than Bernie.
Yeah, I think what Ron was saying is really, that's both really good points. I think the idea that Bernie Sanders really does feel very kind of 2016, right? It's like he had his moment and it's passed. I've been, listen, anything can happen in an election. I've learned that a million times. But my sense is that this is going to be a tough year for him because he's not the new thing, and Elizabeth Warren's out there. And I think a lot of people are like, okay, we've seen this already. And I think the anger thing gets a little... I didn't know that he yelled about a baby.
It's pretty good.
That's pretty cool.
So is there anything he can do about this? I mean, does he just accept this fate, continue the non-aggression
But even if
pact?
he can, I'm not being non-responsive. I don't think he's capable of changing his behavior to do what, like, if you were one of his advisors, if you were telling him what to do, I don't think he's capable of doing it. I think he's like, I'm going to do this the way I'm going to want to do it. I mean, he could try. If I was him, I would try to be a little. Certainly wouldn't yell at babies. I mean, that's like, but I would try to be a little more personable and talk about myself. I guess we've seen some evidence of him trying to do that. But he is what he is, and people do change as they get older. But you sort of reach a certain point where that's it. That cake is baked, and I think that cake is baked.
Yeah. Let me turn to Kamala Harris. She had a surge in the polls after the first debate, and then pretty quickly after that came back to earth in terms of her standings. Why did that happen?
I think it's authenticity. She came out in that first debate and really took it to the vice president, talking about school busing, something that was very controversial back then, so something very controversial now. You come to the second debate and you look at the Medicare for All of, while I'm for everyone being on government insurance, well, no, that's not really what I said. Well, yeah, it's actually what I meant. Well, no, it's not actually what I said. And I think voters kind of looked at her and said, well, what is it? Like, what is your real position? And, from my position of, working for President Bush and then being on the reelect, we wanted to have contrasts with our opponent in that race, John Kerry, and we wanted to make our issue about authenticity, stay with us, you trust us, you know us. And I think with Kamala Harris, people are still trying to figure out do they really know who she is? And if they know who she is, can she be trusted?
One quick add to that. I agree with that. I also think she's always struck me that way. She's not that experienced a candidate, and you see that in the way she's been struggling with the Medicare for All thing. In 4 years she might be. I'm not talking about what her soul is and what her ultimate talents or capacities as a candidate or a president is. But from the first time, I remember interviewing her when she was running for Senate. Right, she just strikes me as someone who might need some more seasoning. What we've seen this time is a lot of candidates who in a normal year would not have gotten this much attention because there's so much hunger to beat Donald Trump, and because all these people are thinking, who probably normally should not be running at this point, they should at some point, thinking, well, if Donald Trump can do it, I can do it. And it's possible she falls into that category. Not that she shouldn't be doing this in 4 years or 8 years, but maybe it's a little early.
Okay, I want to turn to someone else who made a big splash but seems stuck in the polls. Mayor Pete raised a record amount of money. Arguably, he has the best favorable, unfavorable rating of any of the Democratic candidates, but he's stuck. He hasn't moved much. What does he need to do? What has to happen for this race to open up for him?
10 years.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
I think, you guys tell me you disagree. I just think he's too young. He looks too young. He looks 30. What's the reality? And he's credential-wise, he's mayor. He's not been a governor or senator or anything. And I'm not even getting into the gay thing. I think the gay thing could be an issue in a general election. We can talk about that later, but I don't even think that's what is at play now. I think people are looking at him and saying, really nice, really smart-looking kid there, but wait till you begin to shave,
I picture him on the stage debating Trump, and I'm just like, you are. You're just too young. You're just, it's just.
It's funny. I think he might annihilate Trump in a debate because he is so quick and so fast and one-on-one, and when you don't have 10 people on the stage, I think he might do very well. My own view is that for him, for Beto, to the extent that he's still there, for Booker, for Klobuchar, and all these others, Biden needs to begin to fade before that kind of lane opens up, the kind of center-left lane that Biden so completely occupies. Because there's interesting data about, for example, Pete Buttigieg. People think he's too young. They say that in the poll. Then they say they think he could beat Trump. The voters say Democratic voters say they think he could beat Trump. And I think that dynamic may be driving the race. But they think that Joe Biden has a better chance to beat Trump. Now, if that begins to fade away, do you think this just becomes a Warren versus Sanders race? Or do you think these other folks suddenly compete for that Biden lane?
Yeah, I think that that's why this race is kind of interesting. I don't see this becoming a Warren versus Sanders race. Biden could fade away, and I think any one of the candidates that make the threshold of getting on the debate stage next Thursday, whatever day it is, any one of those, for the most part, could fit that lane. So I've been around long enough to say don't write any of them off, because it's all relationship stuff, right? It's all like you're not looking at Buttigieg or Rourke or any of them in a vacuum. You're looking at them as compared to whom. So right now, as compared to Biden, they're not getting much traction. But if all of a sudden Biden begins to fade for the reason you said, all those other candidates are going to get another look. Meanwhile, Warren and Sanders are splitting the left side of the party. So,
see, this is what I don't understand about the Democrats, right? I mean, if you want to look at politics and how not to do things, look at what we did in the last election cycle, where we had 16, 17 Republicans crowding on a stage. You start so early in the cycle that the American people are like, when the heck is this election? It's like over a year, and how long from now? And I think what the Democrats have done to themselves, and we certainly did it because we got Donald Trump, but when you have so many candidates that are vying for attention, that are looking for that, can I at least get to 2% so I can get on the stage? Can I get 2.5% so I can raise some more money? It really, I think, is a destructive process for the party itself. I mean, when we decided to run in late 1999, George W. Bush, Governor Bush, felt, the only real person that we're going to be running against is John McCain. And we focused on John McCain, and we beat John McCain. And I don't think a lot of these Democrats, you mentioned Klobuchar and Booker and some of these other folks that are at the lower echelons of the percentage points, I don't know who they're running against so much as what they're running for. In other words, am I running to beat Beto to get on the stage? Am I running to be next to so-and-so at the debate platform? I think that's one thing that's really hurt the Democrats in this cycle.
Yeah, I really watch this next debate because I think there's a lot of pressure on these candidates to somehow or other distinguish themselves and not to let this race get set in amber, which I think it can see. I can't predict that it will. After all, I'm the person who said no how, no way, not in this universe, not in any alternative universe. Can Donald Trump be elected president of the United States on national television the Sunday before the election? But I think it's possible. I think it's possible that this race could be set in amber and that they have to worry about that. And I think one of the big issues that we may see dominate that debate, you guys have talked about, and that's health care. Sanders and Warren are pushing for a single-payer system where everything and everyone would be covered by one government plan. Candidates like Biden and Buttigieg are promoting an expansion of the Affordable Care Act through a public option. Buttigieg calls it Medicare for all who want it. And Harris has moved away from the Sanders program, or at least seems to, which she also co-sponsored in the Senate. What are the implications of this debate for the primary contest and then for the general election? Does it cut different ways in the two arenas? Ron, you can go first.
I find this fascinating as a Republican because you remember when the Affordable Care Act was put into play and the way that it was going through the House, going through the Senate, of all the promises that were made about how it was going to really transform the American healthcare delivery system. And now you hardly ever hear the Affordable Care Act with the name Barack Obama behind it. Like, right? I mean, it's almost like he's the invisible man, even though this is something that the Democrats felt quite passionate about just a few short years ago. Where I think this gets the Democrats in trouble is that it's a question, again, of electability. If we can't sustain Medicare, if we can't sustain the entitlement programs that we have now, and we're talking about a variety of plans of expanding it to people who are undocumented immigrants, if you're talking about expanding it so that people can buy into it, if you get to a general election, if I'm going to cut the ad for this candidate, Donald Trump, I'm going to hammer the Democrats on electability and say, who's going to pay for this? Is it sustainable? And if it's not working now, why is adding more people and more options to this a viable move?
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical, by the way, that I would go out and tell people that Obamacare isn't working, because that didn't work too well for Republicans in 2018. I think there might be two different ads depending on which Democrat comes through the primaries. And if it's somebody like Buttigieg who says, or Biden, who says, let's keep Obamacare and let's build on it, let's have a public option, I'm not sure the smartest thing for Republicans to do would be to engage on health care. Because when they've engaged on health care in 2018, they lost.
Oh, look, Bob, I'm not going to disagree with you on that 1 second. If it's one thing that is the Achilles heel for Republicans, it's health care, right? I mean, Romney Care was the predecessor to Obamacare, and Republicans had so many years when they controlled both the House, the Senate, and the White House where they could have made a meaningful step on health care reform, same thing with immigration, that I think it really undercuts us, and we have not figured a way to get out of the box known as health care.
The pre-existing, I was going to say also the other side of what you guys are saying is the pre-existing conditions argument. I think that a Democrat running against Trump is going to legitimately be able to say that Trump and the administration are pursuing policies that are going to destroy affordable health care, whatever you want to call it, Obamacare, and take your guarantee of coverage for pre-existing conditions.
And lifetime limits on getting rid of lifetime limits.
Covering your kids up to the age of 26, I think it is. Right?
Yeah.
Those are pretty powerful election issues. So I think that's the other side of that.
And Obamacare is working. We're going to make it better. We're not going to take away private insurance. You can keep your insurance. That's all the Democrats need to say.
So let's say that the Democratic nominee is someone who says we need a single-payer system. You will save money under that system, even though your taxes will go up, because you won't be paying any insurance premiums. You'll be able to go to your preferred provider. You'll be able to pick your own doctor. Is there any way to sell that to the country?
No, because you're going.
No.
And again, I'm
trying to get some disagreement up here.
No, because I think you're going against a political argument where they're saying so you have United Healthcare or whatever. They're going to take your United Healthcare away, and you're going to have to deal with this big government bureaucracy. You're not going to win that argument. And again, I'm not talking policy. I'm not talking what's best for the country and covering all of us. I'm saying that politically, that is a really damaging argument, and it feels like Bernie Sanders is walking right into a very, very, very damaging attack.
Mm-hmm. What he said.
I think he believes that. I mean, I think that's why he's doing it.
Yeah, no doubt.
And we'll have some very interesting poll numbers next week, I think, on how Democratic primary voters see this and how the general electorate sees it. If this were 1948 and Harry Truman got his proposal for government-run health care very much like the British system or France or Germany, and it had passed and it were the law today, it would be the political 10th rail of American politics to suggest you were going to get rid of it. When you create these programs, you can't get rid of them. But I think I agree with you guys, it's probably going to be a very hard sell and might turn the health care issue on its head if Democrats basically said to union members, for example, you have this terrific health care plan, now we're going to take it away. And you're going to have the same thing as everybody else. The other thing, by the way, that nobody's talked about with respect to this, and I'll be interested to see whether one of the other Democrats says it, is if you have to raise taxes to finance this, maybe a lot of people will save because their premiums will go down. There is one significant group of voters who will not benefit at all. Seniors who are already on Medicare. Their taxes, and they pay a lot of taxes actually, their taxes will go up, but they won't get any additional benefit because they already get Medicare.
Well, it's good they don't vote.
And they vote.
Yeah.
And they vote.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to open this up in a couple minutes, but we've gone through this whole discussion. I've watched Democratic debates that have gone on and on and on, and we haven't mentioned, and I haven't heard it much mentioned in those debates, with the possibility of recession looming, shouldn't the Democrats be talking more about the economy?
Yes. I mean, yes.
Why not? Why aren't they?
I think that the Democrats. So look. So a recession is 2 quarters of negative economic growth, and we haven't seen that yet. If you look at some of the leading economic indicators, we might find ourselves in a weakening system. That's why you keep hearing the president rail incessantly at the Federal Reserve Chairman, because he's not thinking that the Fed is doing enough.
Which makes it worse, by the way.
Which makes it worse. Well, but that assumes a knowledge of economics. But, anyway. In any event, I think that the Democrats have been reluctant, Bob, to answer your question, of addressing this because we haven't had 1 quarter, let alone 2 quarters of negative economic growth. And it almost sounds and seems as if you would be talking down the economy. If I were a Democrat, I would be looking at issues that we've all discussed. I would be looking at the kitchen table issues and say, the economy is doing good, but here is why my policies are going to make it better. And that's why you need to get rid of Trump.
I agree. I mean, I think they're not saying anything because they're afraid there's not going to be a recession. And right now, all these people are looking at their 401ks saying, yeah, I'm not doing that bad. And who knows what can happen in the future, especially with someone as unpredictable as Trump, with, the trade wars, with anything. And the one thing he knows is that the economy is his issue. That is a big ticket for him. So he's going to try to preserve that. So I think the Democrats, like you said, are standing back, doing kitchen table things, doing things that they do well, and they're not going to touch the economy right now out of fear that there might not be a recession.
My answer, by the way, to my own question would be they don't have to talk about it. If there's a recession, Donald Trump is gone. Oh, yeah. Given all the other negatives, he's gone.
Yeah.
I think that they have to talk about income inequality, the people who've been left out, left behind in the recovery, the people you talked about in Erie. But I think the recession itself, the fact of it, would doom a president who, by the way, has managed to do something that a guy named Tufte, who was at Yale, created the original model of the economy could predict presidential elections. He's managing to defy, so far, that model with his approval ratings, because all of the other stuff about Trump overwhelms the economy in terms of people's concerns. So I don't know. Adam, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with you. I mean, you don't need to really say anything, and I don't think it makes much sense to try to say the economy is bad if people are thinking that it's good. And you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you're saying the economy is bad, and tomorrow unemployment figures come out and show there's been an increase in unemployment, which I guess Trump kind of hinted at today. I guess he got some hidden look at those figures. So I don't see.
He's not supposed to see them. It's amazing.
Like the pictures of the missiles.
But what I would talk about, when you were talking about income inequality, I'd be talking about that tax bill and saying that and Warren is doing this pretty effectively. That we are helping the rich in the society, and it is not helping the middle class, working class people. That's the way I would do it. I don't think I'd get out there if I was a Democrat and say, "Oh, the economy's in really bad shape," because people don't feel that way, and there's no reason to try to argue against that. There's other stuff to talk about, and if there's, as Bob said, if there's a recession coming, and there very well might be, that's it. That'll take care of it on its own.
Look, there are lots of other issues. There's one last one I want to ask about. There was a climate town hall on CNN yesterday that went for a very, very long time. I don't know how well it held its audience. Do we think, I know climate will be an important issue in the general election between Trump and whatever Democrat it is. Is it going to be the kind of issue that's going to elevate one Democrat over another, or are Democratic primary voters going to conclude that all of the Democratic candidates are pretty good or very good on climate? And therefore, it's not going to be the deciding issue in the primaries.
But I think it's the latter. I mean, I think that generally Democrats are all in the same place on the economy. On climate and the importance of dealing with climate and some of the measures that should be taken. There is definitely some disagreements on some issues, some of the carbon tax, for example. But my sense is most Democratic voters aren't going to be making discrete votes like that. And I think the bigger contrast is going to come in the fall, because whoever the Democratic candidate is going to be somebody who has been talking a lot about climate change versus a president who I think doesn't believe in climate change, it seems fair to say. And there seems to be all this external evidence that climate change is happening, whether it's the hurricane in the Bahamas or the rain in the fires here last year or so.
But Bernie Sanders seems to think, or his campaign seems to think, that they can say, we have the strongest, most comprehensive, most far-reaching, albeit most expensive plan to deal with climate change. So if that's the issue you care about, you should vote for us. Biden says we'll go back into the Paris Climate Accord. I want to get a carbon-free economy by 2050. Goes through a number of other measures. Are people going to listen to that debate and follow it closely, or are they just going to say they both want to do something about climate? Ann?
I agree with Adam. I don't think this is a primary issue. I think they're all, all the Democrats are going to know that the Democratic Party is solidly on the side of doing something about climate change. And when you go into the general, they can come loaded for bear for Trump because he's once again dismantled so many things that the Obama administration has put in place with climate change.
See, this is where I think I agree with Ann and Adam 100% here. This is where the Republican Party, I think, has put themselves in sort of a dark hole or a bad place. If you have someone who's president of the United States who just says, I don't believe there's climate change, right? I mean, I might be a skeptic myself. But then you say to yourself, do you really want to remove yourself from the Paris Accord where you could learn something? Where you could learn what other countries are doing, what other countries are experiencing? Shouldn't you think about a way to engage the scientific community, if you're skeptical, to find out how we can address this issue in a nonpartisan manner? And I think Republicans reflexively saying, oh, it's not true, this is not happening, is a mistake. And I think a lot of voters look at that and say, well, on this issue, the GOP is defunct because they're not even willing to have a conversation, engage with other world leaders, and find out the science behind this, which is, of course, what I think we all would like to do.
Particularly, and Bob, tell me if I'm wrong, particularly younger voters, right? What's kind of crazy about this is the Republican Party seems to be on the wrong side of this issue when it comes to younger voters who are coming of age. In the same way, it struck me the Republican voters were on the wrong side of the issue of same-sex marriage, and we're seeing the effects of that now with the support levels among younger voters for Republicans v. Democrats.
Yeah. Okay, I want to open this up to questions, and someone here has a mic. We'll bring it to you. There's someone in the back there.
Hi, my name is Raymond, and first I want to say I appreciate you guys taking the time to be here. So when I came here, I was pretty excited to come to this event, but right now I stand pretty disappointed, I'm not going to lie, because I did not hear the mention of candidate Andrew Yang. Yeah, woo, Yang Gang. So I just want to say that him and Bernie Sanders are one of the only Democratic candidates that have 10%, at least 10% of Trump supporters that would say they would vote for him if he was the Democratic nominee. And you guys said that no one's talking about the economy, but Andrew Yang's the one who's talking about automation that's coming. And so I want to know what your guys' opinion is on Andrew Yang and what he has to offer.
I guess I'm going to leave you more disappointed. I don't think he'll be the Democratic nominee for president.
That's fair.
And I also think that Joe Biden, for example, can attract a substantial number of Trump voters. So I don't know what poll you're talking about, but the data that I've seen in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin suggests that Yang and Sanders are not the only people who can attract a substantial number of those people who voted, of those folks who voted for Obama and then flipped and voted for Trump. But others up here might have a different view. I think Andrew Yang's a very interesting candidate. Yeah. And the reason I didn't bring him up was because I don't think in the end he's going to be a very big player in the race. So I'm sorry if
I agree with you there. I agree with you there that Joe Biden's the most electable, but I just want an opinion.
Well, I'll start. I kind of like the guy. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I like the guy because he actually says what he believes. He reminds me of the Bernie of this cycle. Feeling the burn the last time, or oh, who's that crotchety old guy, but at least he's coming out and saying what he actually believes. I believe that Yang believes what he's saying. And I give him a lot of credit for that, for his sincerity. When you look at his specific policy positions about giving, a certain amount of money to Americans, and his automation argument is also an interesting one. Like, I, for one, didn't really think about that, and I'm the guy who doesn't go to the automated checkout line. I'd rather go to the clerk, so the clerk's not going to lose their job in the store. But when it comes to an electability issue, it's just not there, and I think that's why so much of the time, interest, and attention by the media has focused on the other candidates. That the media, and don't forget, the media drives this as a horse race, who they believe it's going to win, and unfortunately, I think Yang is still pretty far back in the pack of the horse race.
I find him fascinating, too, and this is called the Center for Political Future. If I were you, I would go and work with this man, because I think he does have a political future, and I think he has tremendous ideas. It's just not going to defeat Donald Trump in this election cycle. But I think that, you know, young people like you should look for the next generation of leaders and look for these new ideas outside, you know, of what we're talking about here with climate change. It's going to affect you and your grandchildren more than it's ever going to affect me. So if I were you, I'd call him up, tell him you want to work for him, and learn something about the political process with him. I think he's really an interesting guy.
Great question. Someone else? Okay, we have someone here.
Thank you for coming. So as far as we know, there are 4 main groups of swing voters: Obama non-voters, Obama third-party voters, Obama Trump voters, and Romney Clinton voters. Now, Obama Trump voters that voted Republican in 2018 are basically lost to the Democratic Party, but the ones that voted Democratic in 2018 are still up for grabs. Now, out of those 4 groups of voters, which of them do you think are the most important for the Democratic nominee to win in order to defeat Donald Trump in the Electoral College?
Adam, you want to start?
I wouldn't quite break it down that way. I mean, I think what we want to do most of all is get back Democratic voters who voted for Obama and voted for Trump this time, or were turned off.
Your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Or voted for Trump. Sorry about that. Who voted for Trump this time? Or just people who didn't vote at all, who got discouraged, who got turned off. So I don't break it down quite in that category. But the group I would look at most of all is the obvious group of people who voted for Obama in 2012 and then went to Trump in 2016.
And I think it's also the voters who didn't vote in 2016. Young people, minorities, you know. But there are big things happening out there. I mean, if you look at white suburban women who voted for Trump by a substantial margin, he now has a very high disapproval among them. And if that predicts the result of how they vote in November of 2020, it's going to be very, very hard for him to get reelected. So if I were still in the business of running these campaigns, I wouldn't say which is the most important. I would say, how do we maximize our chances with each of these groups? One thing that's changed in presidential politics that's critical is ever since the error that my candidate John Kerry made in 2004 of agreeing to take federal funding. So he had an $84 million budget for a 13-week campaign, while George Bush, whose convention came 5 weeks later, had the same budget for 5 weeks. And we had raised $250 million in the primaries, a lot of it on the internet. No one has made the mistake. Well, I guess John McCain took federal funding because he had no choice. But no one who has a choice takes federal funding. And I think because of the energy that's felt on both sides, Trump's raising a lot of money. I think that whoever the Democratic nominee is will raise a lot of money. And therefore, you won't have to triage which of these groups you're going to go after. You're going to be able to say, how do we maximize our chances of getting the Obama Trump voters? How do we maximize our chances of turning out far more of young people? How do we maximize our chances of turning out more African American voters? If as many African American voters had voted in 2016 in Wisconsin as voted in 2012, Hillary Clinton would have won the state easily. So those are those are the challenges. Someone else? Yeah, there's someone right here, and then we'll come back there, I promise.
Hi, thank you for speaking. You talked a little bit about electability at the beginning, and I was wondering if you thought that if people vote by the standard of electability in the primaries, if you think that will disenfranchise female candidates.
I think that's a real, that's a real danger. I mean, no question about it. I don't think it should. I don't think it's fair. I think it's something that Elizabeth Warren is dealing with. It's one of the legacies, again, I don't think fairly, of Hillary Clinton. But no, that's a real serious concern.
I
That's a great question.
totally agree. I think that one of the reasons that you had the Obama voters vote for Trump is there was a hatred for Hillary Clinton. And I think a lot of it was because she was a woman. Saying the deplorables didn't help, but because she was a woman. And I think there are a lot of Democratic voters that think, if we put Warren in the top spot against Trump, he's going to go after. I mean, that a woman would not beat Trump. And that is so, horrible, a horrible thought. But it's actually a realistic situation in this country.
When we asked in a poll a few months ago whether or not, what kind of nominee Democrats wanted, they wanted a male, they wanted someone with Washington experience, they basically wanted, and it's driven by fear. Yep. It's driven by fear of what happened in 2016. And by the way, the fear is not unfounded in the sense that there is now social science research indicating that Hillary Clinton was hurt by sexism in 2016. So yeah, it could very well do that. And that's, whose challenge it is to overcome that? Elizabeth Warren's. Democrats were afraid in 1960 to nominate John Kennedy because he was a Catholic, and he went out, and the big city bosses were all Catholics, and they were the ones who were most afraid because they had lived through Al Smith, who had been crushed in 1928, the first Catholic nominee, and Kennedy went out and won every primary and basically said to them, you got to nominate me. If you don't nominate me, no Catholics are going to vote for you. In those days, primaries didn't determine the outcome. The bosses still did. But he used the primaries as a lever to force them to nominate him. So her challenge is to go out and in these primaries prove that to people that she can win the kinds of votes that they fear she can't. We can't solve it.
And let me be honest with you. I think the Democratic Party, if you look at the demographics of the candidates who are running now and what they're running on, should the Democrats nominate an old white guy and they don't have a woman on the ticket, I think they're done. I mean, I think that all of you are looking at these candidates and are looking for something that is different. And it's different not just based on gender, but they're looking for a different type of candidate. And I actually believe that for the Democrats to win, and particularly to win over independents, you're talking about the college-educated women in the suburbs, you sure as heck better have a woman on the ticket. Otherwise, I think it's peril.
We had questions back there, and then I'll come to you. We only have time for 2 or 3 more, assuming that we don't
Thank you.
filibuster.
So my question is 2 parts. First, just from my observation, from 2016 into 2020, it seems that a lot of the candidates may have an understanding that they don't have a very good chance of winning the general election, but that they may be able to put their own ideas on the table by participating. And my first question is, what is your take on that? Do you think that's true, or do you have a different take on how the candidates have been putting forward their platforms? With Bernie, even though he didn't win in 2016, he, at least from my observation, did manage to move the party further left. The second part of my question is with candidates like Julian Castro, who are raising issues that are really huge in Black and Latino communities, so immigration, lead in water, issues that aren't necessarily nationally important, but that do really matter to our communities. Do you think that this kind of use of the presidential primaries is an effective way to put those issues on the table?
I think you'll see every Democrat talk about immigration, by the way. And I think there's deep disapproval of the Trump administration's immigration policies. The danger is if you say, well, we're going to disband border enforcement and we're not going to make illegal immigration illegal. I think that's when you get into trouble. The first question, Jay Inslee did it. Yeah. He's had an impact on the race. Elizabeth Warren, if you read the New York Times today, her plan on climate is basically his plan. Yeah. He just picked it up.
I think people run for president for a lot of reasons, and even if they don't think they're going to win. And sometimes, I don't know whether Inslee knew that coming into this, but sometimes it's to get their ideas out there, right, which is great. Sometimes it's because they're running for the next race, right, because they're thinking, get some publicity now and I'll be in a better position. And sometimes because they want to get on television and make lots of money. I'm just being frank about it. So there's a lot of reasons that people run for president, even if they don't think they're going to win. Some of them are honorable, some of them are not. The fourth one is they might win. I mean, I did not think Donald Trump was going to become president when he announced his candidacy.
Neither did he.
Yeah, so neither did he. So there are a lot of reasons why, but you're right. Getting. I mean, Inslee's a great. I can't think of an earlier example. Inslee seems really like historic, right? Who's really come up with an idea and got it out there like that. But I think that's the reason why a lot of people run. Not all of them.
Yeah, let me say, and Bob has obviously run a presidential campaign. I've been the debate coach for 3 candidates, and I can tell you, sitting in debate prep with a candidate, they're not running to get their issue out on the table. They're running to win. I mean, for the amount of grueling debate prep, the traveling around the country and doing all these, they're running to win. And so the notion that someone would go, well, I'm just going to run for a while to get my policy platform out, elevate it. No, they want to be the next president of the United States, full stop.
Someone over here had, yes.
Okay, hi, I'm Rachel. It's really great to meet you guys. I'm excited for the rest of the events. So my question is about the primary process. You guys sort of spoke at length about how you feel the primary process is, sort of failing. We have 17 candidates, 10 candidates on a stage at a time. How do you believe that we can reform the processes for Republicans and Democrats in the future so that the primary is less destructive?
I don't think it will be reformed. I mean, people have talked ever since I was a little older than you guys about reducing the influence of Iowa and New Hampshire. It never happens. Iowa goes first, New Hampshire goes second. And you know what? They're both swing states. No one wants to lose them in the general, so no one's going to take away their first status as the first caucus state for Iowa, and the first status of New Hampshire as the first primary. I don't know. Anybody?
Let me say this, Bob, and I agree with you 100%, but it's more than that. What the real issue is now with the decentralization of the DNC and the RNC, they don't have as much control over the party's candidates the way that they used to. Why? Because you've got the internet. What do you do with the internet? You raise money. And a lot of these guys and gals think, well, the hell with what the national party says. I'm just going to go out there. I'm going to run. I'm going to hit a certain threshold. Whereas in our respective day, I think the RNC and the DNC was able to exert a lot more power over who was going to run, how many candidates were going to be out there, and with the amount of money that's at stake, and with Iowa and New Hampshire, I just don't see it happening.
Okay, one last quick question. Only one person will answer. Okay, right here. Oh, well, yeah, this is.
Just had her hand up.
Yeah.
We can see you.
That's what's nice about sitting in the front.
And I apologize to you. You get the first question next time, okay?
I've seen several polls that state that foreign policy is an issue that both a majority of Republicans and Democrats say that they disapprove of greater than any other issue with the Trump administration. But a lot of Democratic candidates haven't been speaking about foreign policy extensively, and I was wondering if you believe that they should be, and if they should be, what message you think they should be putting out there.
Ann or Adam? One person's going to answer.
Okay, I think it's a general election issue, not a primary issue, in my opinion. I think the way to frame it and the way it will be framed is Donald Trump going to make you less safe? Is Donald Trump policies erratic enough that it puts the country at risk? That's the way. I mean, that's what I think it all comes down to. I'm not sure I see that coming up in the primary at all. I think but in a general election, no question about it. If we're still here. I couldn't resist it.
That was pretty good.
A couple of things before we conclude. Thank you all for coming. I promise at the Debate Watch a week from tonight in Annenberg Hall, there will be air conditioning. And secondly, we're going to start something new, which if you're willing to do it, which is we're going to put an icon up on the screens, and all you have to do is aim your phones at it, and then you can take a survey about what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like us to do different with these events. But I really want to thank Ron, Ann, Adam, not just for tonight, and you'll see them again during the semester, but they're going to be spectacular fellows, and they're going to really help make the experience that we have at the Center for the Political Future and the Unruh Institute very enriching for students over the next 6 months or next 3 months. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week for the Democratic debate.
Thank you.